Thank you, Vince. Again, yeah, Philip Fulton. As Vince said, I run my own consulting firm, JJRE, but I'm also a chair with Vistage. And what we do is we bring CEOs together, senior executives, trust advisors into think tanks, basically. And I know Jerry. Jerry and I were talking. Jerry's a classmate. Jerry Novotny is a classmate of mine from Kellogg. We're both old farts from 1974. And we were talking about a topic for you guys, and we thought it would be fun to have what's the perspective of a CEO and to a CFO, and what does a CFO expect of a CEO. So I've invited together, we kind of cobbled together 4 people. The 4th is on the way, but I'll introduce you 2 CEOs, 2 CFOs, and we got a bunch of questions. I'll be asking them, and we'll do this for about 40, 45 minutes, and then we'll open it up to you guys for questions. And hopefully it'll be fun and kind of interesting time period. So to my right, and I'll go down, and I need my glasses to read, is Mike Segretti. Mike is the president of Rex Electric and Technologies. He's been with them for he's got over 20 years of executive and financial management experience. He was promoted to president of Rex about 4 years ago. During that time, Mike has led multiple company initiatives on process improvements, centralized procurement, field execution, project management. Since taking over the helm, Mike and his team have produced a 35% increase in revenue and record profits through June 2016. He's committed to broadening Rex's presence by going after new geographic markets and new verticals such as industrial, government, and healthcare. Prior to joining Rex, he served as the general manager and chief financial officer of 21st Century Systems, Inc., Newmark Technology, and Trace Miller. So I find when I thought about this and I invited Mike to join us, I thought he brings an interesting perspective because he's played both roles in what he does. He's got his MBA from DePaul. I won't hold that against you. And Mike is also just as he was one of my members of one of my CEO groups. I got some ringers here. Sal is partner with B2B CFO. He brings over 28 years experience in accounting, risk, and treasury management, strategy development, and implementation in many industries. His extensive experience, knowledge, and operating experience position him to quickly assess the needs of businesses, develop a plan of action, mentoring and hands-off management. He likes to mentor and has a hands-off managerial style. After obtaining his accounting degree from U of I, Sal started his professional career in public accounting, servicing audit, tax clients. After moving into industry, he had positions as a controller and treasurer, worked as a CFO for both private and publicly held companies in heavy industrial machinery, medical device manufacturing, electronics manufacturing, high-tech engineering, and electronics recycling companies. He's helped with startups, acquisitions. He's also in a peer group, and he's actually been helping some of my CEO clients as a CFO, so I think he brings some interesting perspective as well. Kim, to Sal's right, is the CEO of Obix. Obix his name is Clinical Computer Systems, Inc. Any of you ever had a baby? And you sat there next to your wife or spouse or significant other and watching the monitor and seeing the blips that's going on. It's his software that's running that. He's one of the leading providers of fetal monitoring software. He's an entrepreneur. He's very good at developing strategies, driving top line and bottom line results. He's a thought leader, and he has a. I've known Kim for several years. He's been at Obix. He started as a little pup. I think he's been with them for 19 years. It's been 19, 20 years.
20 years this year.
And he's learned, also he was a member of my group, and what I found interesting is how he matured to realize the value of what a CFO can bring to the table. So I think it would be interesting to hear what he said. Tom Galvin is our last moderate, final panelist, and he is right now, I guess, caught up in traffic, but as soon as he comes in, he'll make a grand entrance and we'll introduce him as well. and I wouldn't know Tom if I saw him, so when he walks in, we'll have some fun. So, I guess I want to start with having you guys first start off with answering this question. What is the most important takeaway that you think for the attendees that you want to, hopefully they walk away with regarding the relation between the CEO and CFO? Go, Mike. We'll just go through this one, then we'll start next year.
I guess, to me, it's about the trust level you have between those two positions. There's nothing more important than the relationship between CFO. I have served as both CFO, president, and I had combined roles as president CFO for several years, up until November of last year. And you need to walk away from here thinking, these gentlemen have taught me something about trust in our relationship with our CFOs.
Sal, what do you think? What's an important takeaway for the group?
When you're an internal CFO, there's a lot of things that are playing in your head. Specifically, do I lose my job if I tell the CEO no? You've got to have the trust and the knowledge and the numbers and whatever to prove that your logic is right before you say something. However, you've got to say something if you know that the direction is right.
I think that the basic, any relationship is based on trust. So that's the foundation of everything. How you build on that and how you establish that trust and what you do to do that is not just giving numbers and you have to challenge. And you challenge from a factual basis, right? So I'll have different business unit leaders come to me and say, hey, I want to do this, I want to do that, and it sounds like a great idea. And I think your job is kind of an oversight of the organization and understand, have a different view of what their capacities are, and being able to come back to me and say, well, I know, the VP of regulatory said we could do this, or services, but they don't have the budget to do that, they don't have the people, their past performance hasn't indicated that, the expenses are, you have the rationale for why the other business leaders aren't necessarily well aligned to what the strategies are. I think you have a unique position to be in an oversight position for that.
So making a grand entrance. Sweet.
Yes. Oh, glad this was a panelist, not a.
Shift a little bit to your left so that Tom is not just stuck in there. Welcome, Tom. I'm glad you made it.
Yeah, it took a while.
Don't worry. We're just starting off, so we're good. So I'm going to introduce Tom. Tom has spent the last 30 years managing the finances for small to medium-sized privately owned companies. His experience has been in industries ranging from healthcare services, direct marketing, sales, and manufacturing. He is currently with Rising Medical Solutions, a cost containment company principally dealing with insurers that are in the workers' compensation and auto insurance markets. As an executive for companies of this size, the crossover into other departments such as operations and human resources is natural and quite prevalent. As in many similar sized organizations, Tom wears many hats with which he is involved. He's got a bachelor's degree in accounting and finance from DePaul University. He's a registered CPA and earned a CFP designation from the University of Denver. So Tom, welcome aboard.
Well, thank you. Sorry I'm late.
So I was asking the group their perspective, what do you think is important for the group to walk away with in this discussion about the relation between the CEO and the CFO?
Okay. I thought when Jerry asked me to be a speaker here, I was uniquely qualified for it because for the first 5 years that I was with Rising, myself and the CEO were somewhat detached. He traveled a lot. We didn't have a lot of communication between each other. I mainly worked with the COO of the company, and when he left in 2012, it sort of reignited the relationship between myself and the CEO. So I think most importantly, I would say communication. Make sure that you get along well with the CEO. I think since my CEO was more or less a traveling type individual, we had a hard time trying to schedule meetings. So I made it my point to actively seek out his time and make sure that we had special time together where we can discuss the issues on his mind and what I can bring to the table. I think communication, being able to be accessible from a top-down standpoint, I think he was, I would try to get as much information from him as possible and act on that when it came to that point. So that would be what the takeaway here would be. Make sure you find time to get that FaceTime with your CEO.
Thank you, Tom. And as we go through this, I told the panelists that if we don't agree with each other, I'd love to have you debate each other, so it's an open, try to have some fun. So I guess my next question to you all is, if you were looking for CFOs or you were looking to the CEOs, I'm going to ask you kind of what other important characteristics, traits that you think should be brought to the table. Particularly, like, what are the 3 most important characteristics a CFO should bring to the CFO position?
In my opinion, it's vision, communication skills, and good character. To elaborate on the vision a little bit, somebody once explained to me the difference between a good controller and a good CFO. The controller is the rearview mirror. A good CFO is your headlights and your windshield wipers. Most controllers, at least in my experience, have great character. Not all of them have great communication skills, and not all of them have great vision. So to me, those are the 3 most important.
Yeah, to piggyback on that, great analogy. From my perspective, a CEO is like a head on a body, right? The CEO thinks, sees, the vision, everything. And the CFO is like a neck on the body. He shows the head, the view all over, up, down, side to side, to make sure that nothing is coming to hit you. However, CFO is supposed to be, CEO is supposed to climb up the tree and see the forest through the trees, and the CFO is supposed to be right there, watching the same picture, to see if you're actually in the right forest. So it's all those metaphors, it's all those things. It's really important to see the future for the CFO. Controllers are the guys that are looking what happened.
And I think the answers seem to have a common theme to them, and the planning is really the most important part of what a CEO needs to get back from the CFO. Especially in some of I think all times are always challenging. I know in healthcare right now it's becoming challenging. We're talking a little bit about it just before we started. A lot of hospitals are reducing staff, and so for my business, how do we stay relevant? How do we continue to sell? And so I my CFO to kind of monitor what's going on with our customers' business as well, because that's going to affect how we plan our business. So part of your job isn't just managing what goes on at the company, but it's looking at your customers' businesses, and then how does your business adapt to what's going on in that marketplace. So you're really a consultant with the CEO to help establish that vision and how the company drives forward.
I've been told one of my personality traits in the business world is a harmonizer, and one of the best compliments that was paid to me by my CEO is that in my position, I'm able to bring all of the departments together, all of the cost centers together to more or less work with each other. I provide information, useful information, which I think was mentioned earlier. With that information, I think we can make sound decisions as a team. It really helps when you are able to get along with all of your managers, and they seek your input as far as what they can do better for the company as a whole.
I was curious, thank you. I got some more questions, but how many of you are CFOs in the room? I'm imagining most of you. How many of you are, is there any CEOs, other business owners? Oh, you're a lone gun, good for you. How many advisors are in the room? Consultants, advisors, okay. Good, I just want to get a sense of kind of like who's around the table. Well, actually, interesting. I had an interesting experience. Sal and I were in the same room with the CEO of a company, and I think the issue is that the CEO isn't getting what the CFO is saying, and it was kind of an interesting battle going on. I don't know if it's a battle, but it was differences of opinion. So my question to you guys, when you're from both perspectives, if the CEO isn't getting it, doesn't kind of see what you're talking about or doing, or kind of trying to emphasize, what do you think you need to do? What is the challenge there that you face, or do you have an example where you kind of experienced that, and how did it turn around? Tom, why don't you start?
All right. Well, I think you have to really appeal to your CEO's sense of business. And
have you been in a situation like that?
I'll give an example where I started getting, this is back in 2012, I started getting invoices from our outside legal firm. And they all talked about reorganizing the company. I had no idea that my CEO had this grand plan of creating a holding company with several LLCs underneath it. And I went to him and I asked him, you know, what are these for? Can you give me a little insight? Oh, I forgot to tell you. He essentially, and this was, by the way, in November, so I had to quickly gather my team and you know, we had to do all types of tax filings that I had no idea that we'd had to do at that point, that we had to change our whole payroll structure. It was one of those things that, you know, he just felt like, oh, I'll do this, and when it's all done, I'll let the CFO know about it. So this was in my period of, you know, really being a little bit detached from what he was doing. So I think at that point he got it. He said, you know, I think I better get you more involved with what I'm thinking from time to time. And I said, that wouldn't be a bad idea. So that's when I more or less, you know, said, let's structure something. I worked with his administrative assistant, said, you know, we need at least a monthly meeting, even if we have nothing to say but talk about our kids or whatever. We need, and believe me, we don't talk much about our kids anymore. But it really sort of showed the light on him that, you know, he was working somewhat in a silo, and he wasn't really sharing a lot of the information that I think he should have. And it goes both ways, too. There were times that I felt like, oh, you know, I've been doing this. I should probably let Jason know that this is an issue. And I think from that point in time on, it seems to have worked out fine.
So I guess I have a question. So in retrospect, what would you have done differently if you could to kind of avoid situations like that?
Well, again, I think it was more or less the non-structure of a communication line, a form of communication where we actually forced ourselves to sit down and talk to each other. I was, again, this was a period of time where myself and the COO of the company were sort of running the entire business. Our CEO was traveling a lot, doing a lot of the sales at that point in time. So I think that's when we realized, you know, it can't work that way.
Anybody else have a good year?
I do, actually. When I started with Rex Electric back in 2006, I knew the owner. We had gone to school together, high school together, and we had been friends. Talked about getting together in the 90s, and I just felt better in the software consulting industry. So he finally came to me. His company had grown from a mom and pop shop to $50 million in revenue, and convinced me that they needed me in a CFO role, and that eventually I could take over for him in Canton. When I walked in, their executive team consisted of 4 others, the CEO and 3 other gentlemen, all of whom were electricians their entire lives, none of whom had college degrees, and all of whom had worked for Rex Electric their entire lives. So their entire perspective was from that company, and it was a culture shock for me, coming into a company with absolutely no controls. It was the Wild West. And my first initiative was to try and convince him that he needed a purchase order system. And then having his field personnel, union electricians, ordering directly from vendors and project managers was somewhat of a disaster, and, you know, open to potential theft, whatever. In December, and he wasn't used to that. He was used to, you know, flying pretty loose. And I said, I got to get this guy between the hash marks here. It's just not going to work. One of our top vendors came to me, and he was going to take me to lunch for the holidays, and he had a couple stacks with him of invoices, and they were totaling about $1.7 million in unpaid invoices, none of which had been accrued. Nobody had any idea. They'd go into offices, and some project manager would have one behind his file cabinet, and then he'd say, that's too old, I'm not going to pay you, that type of thing. So I had to go to him in December, which is our fiscal year end, and say, we're going to have to take a hit for well over $1 million. We're not going to pay it all, but well over $1 million. You have no controls here. And I think he started to see the light at that point. We had another incident with where theft was involved when copper got really high in price. Our personnel tend to get real clever with who they order from, where it's shipped to, and all that. So I finally got my purchase order system, and I had developed, again, I'll go back to the trust, started to develop a level of trust with him that there's a lot of holes. That was just one example. Believe me, there were 1 million holes in this organization that hopefully over time I was able to close up.
Well, being the CEO, I've never been in the CFO role, so it's harder to know what maybe I've missed in the communication from the CFO. I know probably my most difficult relationship point was, started the company from the beginning, and so started in a bedroom, about 120 employees today, but growing through that, we went from my wife doing the books to hiring a controller, and when I was trying to push the controller then to be a financial planner, and planning is about estimating and guessing and not having the assurances of finality like you have in the numbers when you're looking, and it became a huge point of conflict for us. I mean, massive point of conflict where we were butting heads at every conversation, and we ultimately separated on friendly terms. I still see her about once a year. But then when she actually recommended her old boss to come in and take her role, and working with Mark now is quite a pleasure in terms of looking at forward planning, so that headlights versus the rear view mirror analogy is very, very true. And understanding what your role is and how that communicates with me and where that goes is really, really important.
What traits did you realize you were missing going from her to Mark?
I didn't realize, because again, much like Rex Electric, I didn't know what I was missing. I'm a technology guy. Somebody grunted about that.
We understand it, is what you're saying.
And so I didn't know that I was missing anything. What's the difference? I don't know. You guys run numbers. There's no difference between that. It's all the same stuff. And so you don't know what you're missing until you get it because you got it, right? You can tell me all day long that a financial planner is different than a CFO, but it's all accounting. What's the difference? And so until you get into, and I've learned to appreciate the nuances of all the departments, regulatory, development, all of those areas. When you get into the nuances of the departments, defined benefits and finance is freaking black magic. The rules don't ever seem to be the same or consistent. So getting an appreciation for that is big, but I don't think there's a way to know what you're missing until you get it. And what I would advise is if you're having a hard time engaging with your CEO and having him get it, which is the next question, so from my perspective, I'll jump to that. One up them, right? If he's not the chairman of the board, I would imagine most of the CFOs have some access or some relationship with the board. Not to throw them under the bus, but communicate with them. And they can engage with them. And hopefully they don't throw you under the bus in the process. Or bringing in an outside advisor. Say, hey, I really feel strong about this, and if you don't get what I'm saying, maybe somebody else has to come in with a different voice, or a different VP that can come in and explain something similar with different words, because the words make a difference, and all of a sudden things will click. And I think that's really, really important, is not just to come at me with your same information and the same words every time, because I'm not getting it. And I won't get it until somebody can tell me in a different way. That's where a different voice can help.
So, I think you have an interesting perspective in that you were in the CFO role and now you're out working and advising and helping companies in kind of an advisory role. What do you see? What did you learn? What was your experience in that former life, in the current life, that you say would help? Some insights about how to make that relationship that you got a knucklehead of a CEO.
Yeah, when you're inside of a company, you're definitely, looking for, there's a lot more involved. For example, your paycheck is involved. When you're a consultant like myself right now, it's not the paycheck, it's doing the right thing for the company. So you're not worried about saying the right things and CEO not hearing you. However, first things first, make sure that you are the one that is right when you're presenting things that are unpopular with the CEO. And if you are right and you have the numbers behind you, you have consensus of the company behind you, then you can present your case and argue your case. And then if anything goes wrong and the CEO still sticks to his guns for whatever reason, at a certain point in time you have to say it's the right course of action or it's the wrong course of action. I have to do something to make my point. And sometimes walking away is the key as well. I had a situation when I was inside a publicly traded company and the CEO insisted that the board of directors did not need to know that he's opening up a subsidiary in Europe. So he's transferring tons of funds to Europe, and I'm saying it's a publicly traded company, you can't do that. So ultimately, I went to the board, and the CEO said, well, you can't be here doing this because you're undermining my authority. So I submitted my resignation. It really depends on how strongly you believe in what you're saying and how right you are. And I'm butting heads with 5 different CEOs right now. I have 5 different clients that I'm, every day there's something new. Be it, I want to open up 5 different channels, revenue channels. And I have this particular opportunity, and I have that particular opportunity, and it's all great, and I'm going to just go and do it. And then you sit back and you go, okay, well, you need $2 million to fund this opportunity. You need $5 million to open up this opportunity. It's great. Where's the cash coming from? Are you going to go to the bank? You're going to borrow the money, or you're going to put it out of your pocket? Well, if you don't have it in your pocket, now you have the ratios that the banks won't support. You can't do all the opportunities. You got to pick one. And of course, that's not popular. But this is what a CFO is to a CEO, in my opinion. Sometimes you just got to be really unpopular about telling them the truth.
I hope you're right on all of those
I
decisions.
hope I'm right, exactly. Sometimes you got to check your facts.
Right.
You got to check your facts.
And I guess, the conviction part of it, I have to agree with you. I mean, if you're convinced that your approach is solid, I think you have to appeal to these CEOs' sense of business to make them understand. And in retrospect, too, I could remember I would butt heads with my former CEO, and it took a consultant to sort of let the CEO understand my point of view. Of course, he got all the credit. I had the idea.
And that's what we do. We take your watch to tell you what time it is, right?
There you go. Absolutely.
I guess as you're talking, there's an experience in my life that I saw the value of the CFO. It was I worked at hospitals, and there was a gentleman called George Caldwell, who was eventually the CEO of Lutheran General Hospital that became Advocate eventually. But he had a CFO, Don Ripper, that he relied on. Don not only knew the numbers, but he had a great appreciation of how the business operated within the hospital. He understood, and he was relied on very much, and he was at almost the table of most meetings that took place. And I recognize the value of a good CFO because that first experience was in Washington, D.C. George left Washington, that hospital, to become Lutheran General. And when he moved, and I visited George at Lutheran General, there was a few things that he brought with him. One, he mirrored his office. The office had the same furniture, wallpaper, everything. It was laid out the same as in Washington, D.C. But he also had Don Ripper. He brought with him from Washington out to Chicago too, because Don was a critical piece of his success. Because without him, I don't think he would have been nearly as successful as he was. I'm going to interrupt this. Do you guys anybody have 1 or 2 questions that we might field to kind of get you guys engaged? And speak loudly so we can, everybody hear.
I've got a very big mouth.
Okay.
The gentleman who acted as a consultant from the outside, did you ever feel compelled to go to the board of directors and tell them what's going on? After all, the CEO works for them, not himself.
Well, in my case, yeah, I felt compelled, because it's a publicly traded company. I'm signing, the CFO, I'm signing off on the 10Ks and 10Qs. So, yeah,
But you never did, right?
I did.
Okay.
Oh, absolutely.
How'd that turn out for you?
Ultimately, I resigned.
Okay.
You have, sometimes if you strongly believe that what is being done isn't right, you've got to do what you got to do.
So then I have my follow-up question. I asked this at the Northern Trust Company in a room of 300 people with 5 panelists who are all experts on helping select board members. So why don't we fix this problem? Why don't we have the CFO report directly to the board of directors? Now, that one responded with a whole lot of questions and answers from 4 of the people, and then there was one guy who stood up on the board up there. He was the former CEO of Sears, and he looked at me and he said, "Son, I've been the CEO of 5 corporations, and that is the stupidest thing I've ever heard of in my entire life." By the time this was all over, I had people coming up congratulating me, because I actually believe, and I've been through a lot of things like you have, but I'm a treasury guy. I have all the money. The CEOs love spending it. I see it solving a whole lot of problems. And I even went as far as saying, how about if you can't fire the CFO without board approval? Now, they said, well, maybe we should have the board members help us hire a CFO. I said, no, that's not going to do it. So I'm just curious if you wouldn't mind, I know it's a crazy idea, I've got a lot of them, but I've seen this before where the CFO gets caught up. You got a choice. You either keep the big mansion your spouse wanted and your kids go to Harvard, or you beat the pavement. What do you do?
Who wants to take a shot at that?
Well, I'll take a shot in the sense that I don't see a downside to that. I will say that in my organization, it's a smaller organization. I think it's overkill. But I will say that I have private meetings with our audit committee. I have our CEO has private meetings with our audit firm. There's a number of areas that we sort of collaborate on as CEO and CFO that we discuss independently with the board. So it's not outrageous that the line of directorship should be that the CFO report to the board of directors. I think it's not the standard. So I don't necessarily agree with the CEO of Sears that it's ridiculous. I think there's some merit to that, but perhaps that's what he was saying, that it may be an aspect that is overkill as opposed to necessary.
I think what he was getting at is he never wants the CFO presenting any numbers to a board of directors that he hasn't seen or filtered, so he doesn't get blindsided.
Yeah.
And I've been in a lot of corporations, publicly held and privately held, and I can tell you there's a whole lot of filtering that goes on. And my responsibility, honestly, is to the board of directors. I have gone around the CEO before, but I'll tell you exactly what happened. The head of the audit committee faxed the corporate secretary and he said, "Fix this, make it go away."
And
And that was actually a publicly held company.
Yeah.
any other kind of response here? By the way, I appreciate your question. Maybe you should be up here as a panelist. Good.
I'm sorry for...
Go.
Somebody has to go.
Ultimately, you wake up in the morning and you look at yourself in the mirror. If you don't like what you see, there's no place. So, do you want to be a whistleblower? And as a CFO, are we supposed to be reporting to the board of directors versus a CEO? 50-50. The bottom line, if the things inside the company that are being done aren't kosher, you better be absolutely clear that your name is on the bottom, you know, when you're signing all those things, you know, all the papers, the bank papers, the checks, whatever it is. If you're not happy with what's going on, I guess you're gonna have to be hitting the pavement, or at least in my case, I did. Just hit the pavement instead of staying in and winding up, you know, behind the bars.
I mean, you're saying it's really a trust and communication issue and a transparency and ethics issue. Those two balance out with each other. So if there isn't if the board doesn't want the transparency of, you know, so plausible deniability is another statement that could be aligned with that. So if they want plausible deniability, they don't want the transparency. Because, well, as it, you know, communications broke down, then nobody's at fault. And so if they, what you're looking for is really organizations that behave, and I think what you're asking for is organizations that behave in a certain way and have that transparency, have those ethics that align with what yours are. Because you can change reporting, you can change the reporting structure and what you described in terms of giving them information and then going back and saying, back paper this and fix it. It's still going to happen. It didn't change anything. So it's really about the alignment of transparency and ethics then that matter more than what the reporting structure is.
Having been in both roles, I agree with you 100%. I think as a CEO, president, I would feel more comfortable if my CFO was reporting to a board. He's guarding the bag of money, and I have other things, strategic planning to work on. But I think there needs to be a dotted line, a strong dotted line to the president, because he is supporting the operation. You're working with him on budgets. If he's going to present financial information, as long as he's giving it to the CEO simultaneously, I don't see a problem with that at all. But I agree with you.
Anybody have another question? Sure.
Yeah, you know, as CEOs, you have certain strengths. You know, your strengths got you there, otherwise you wouldn't be in the CEO position. But at the same point, you know, everybody has some weaknesses. But hopefully, good CEOs appreciate, you know, and have people within the organization who may be the entirely different opposite style, but they're there to watch your back. Because you know, it's not going to be your strength; it'll be your weaknesses that might be your downfall. And I just on a board we were talking about the CEO, and I had some strength, but the weaknesses are becoming a real handicap to your organization. So my question is, and who in your organization is that person? Do you have a person in your organization that is your opposite, who kind of, you know, fills in the blank on weekend? Is that the CFO? Can often be the case, because very often the CFO has a very different style than the CEO. The CEO might be very visionary. CFO, you know, you need that, a visionary will need that detailed person. So I'm curious, how do you kind of balance out your weaknesses as a CEO?
Good question. In my case, it's both my controller, he's not a CFO yet, and my CIO, who has controls on the company. They are the balance. Oftentimes, my business unit leaders will say, "Why do you always side with them?" I said, if I don't back these two guys, you know, they'll never have any credibility in this organization. And coming from the CFO role, I mean, you always wanted that level of trust that your CEO is going to back you, because you got his best interest in mind.
It's an organizational development issue, I think, is what you're talking about. And again, a lot of that goes back to board governances then, in terms of how you're aligning and building the company. A lot of times as an individual, you can't even describe what your own weaknesses are. You view your actions and your behaviors as what they are. So unless you have others around you, and if you're the, you know, the chair or the CEO, unless you're open to hearing those things, there's some guys that are so egotistical, it doesn't matter if you tell them to their face. Bring in the guy that's going to balance, they're going to ignore them anyhow. So again, a lot of that I think goes as much to recognizing it and then that person being open to the behavior changes of whatever that means to address that.
A plug, a little different plug from what from my world. What I find interesting is those situations. Where do you go to kind of talk about your frustration about the CEO not working, or the CEO is frustrated with the CFO? I know some of these guys under this table know that when they're in a group of other peers and they can talk about what's going on, or sometimes they're kind of put on the table, or they're accountable. The guys, the fellow CEO or a fellow CFO or a fellow consultant will say, you're not doing it right. it's kind of, there's another world that I strongly suggest that you guys, as you go in your career, might want to find a peer group to be able to talk about those frustrations, because from their experience, they will give you some new insights. I know Sal brought a client issue to the table of his peer group, and I think we gave him some different ideas of how to approach the discussion, because he was frustrated with what that CEO was doing. I know Kim, I'm putting on the table, we did that same thing. He was talking, as an example, I remember he came up with a different way how to finance, how to price his business. And we talked about it at our building, and we said, go back and share that with his team, and blah, blah, blah. And he comes back and says, well, I didn't get much feedback. Everybody kind of, it was, if I'm correct,
Rubber stamping,
yeah, it was rubber stamping, and we kind of then challenged him, well, what is it? Why did, it's you who's the problem. How did you communicate, how did you present it? And he kind of, I think will admit that he kind of set it up so it was kind of hard for them to not rubber stamp. So, I don't know, I guess my perspective, there's another world to help you with that issue. I guess back to you guys, where have you felt this, the CFO, your experience was like a home run, that it was so critical that it really made a major difference to the business that you were working with? Does that make sense, my question? Yeah, because it wasn't on a piece of paper originally.
Not quite, but if you're talking about a CFO is contributing to the business, or a CEO is contributing to the relationship between the two, contributes to something within the business, that's a home run? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, where was in your experience that home run where you felt that the one couldn't have been done without the other, kind of, it was critical to a huge success?
So as a small business, starting from scratch, a lot of things ran because Kim said. I said it could be done. I said it couldn't be done. Everything was under my authority, right? Great control, power and control with that. And then it gets to a point where you can't know everything that's going on, can't control all of that, and that's when budgeting starts to become very important. And not that I don't think it was that I was afraid of losing the control, but it was like, well, do they understand really what they need, and can that business unit manager really manage that budget and hold themselves accountable to that? And it was with the CFO working with the different business, then I could understand how they could manage it. It wasn't just that business unit leader alone trying to run the budget, but the CFO working with them, and it's that collaboration out into the business again, working with the different business unit leaders and making sure that they understand what they're doing, they're able to hold themselves accountable, and when they start to get sideways, they have somebody to go to talk to get realigned. It doesn't have to be me.
How important is, again, I'm asking you questions that weren't on the piece of paper, how important is it that the CFO has a good understanding of how the business operates and runs?
Yeah.
But all aspects, going to the operations, it's critical.
I agree. We have our controller go out to job sites on a regular basis. He's involved in every aspect of the business. He doesn't understand. In the construction industry, it's the WIP report every month, your work in progress. When I started, there was no WIP. The auditors would do it at the end of the year, so you go month to month, depending on how you're feeling. And so he has to be in tune with projects. And you can't just take the word of some foreman out in the field and I'm 40% complete of his job. So unless he's totally in tune with the business operations, he's not going to be accurate in his monthly financials.
And operations, clearly one of the largest line items on any income statement is the personnel costs. So in my company, yes, it's vital. We've all gone through peaks and valleys with earnings, and one of my wins was the fact that the information that was presented to all the managers forced them to realize that we're overspending. On a negative side, we had too many employees for the operations that we were engaged in, and we had a major layoff that they came to me and said, this is what we're going to have to do. And I said, I've been telling you that for about 4 or 5 months. So it's critical that you're involved in that in the operations. You try to eke out all of the efficiencies. I mean, one of the best outcomes of that period where we were going through some tough times was people looked at every dollar that they spent, and they didn't do that when we were sort of riding high at that point. So operations is very important for you to understand and understand where the cost of the dollars are going.
Yes, sir.
Along those same lines, being critical to the operations, where's the appropriate role? Where should the CFO get engaged in contract negotiation from a sales perspective? Because I've had experiences where cultures where contracts are with major customers are negotiated, and then after the fact, after everything's been negotiated, the CFO comes in and then they look at it and say, "This, you can't do this." What's been your experience? What do you advise to kind of, I guess, get the proper balance there? 'Cause you don't want to be on sales calls, but you also don't want to be dealing with a bad contract after the fact.
You got it.
Yeah, this is where, sorry, this is where you got to get ahead of the game. The budgeting, the forecasting, the planning, all that stuff has to happen before any contracts are signed. Because the bottom line is, if, and this from, sometimes you work from the, top down, sometimes you got to work from bottom up. And the CEO, or whoever, the head of the sales, have to be they have to clearly understand the gross profit margins, the requirements for profitability, and the requirements for revenue drivers. Because if they don't, this is where the company gets in trouble. Liquidity is the most important thing in any organization. And how the cash comes in, how long it stays, how long it turns, all of that stuff is important, but also the quantity of the numbers of dollars coming in and the numbers of dollars going out. If you budget it all out and then you present the budget, everyone participates in the budget building, and they understand what the drivers are, and the gross profit is required in order to drive profitability in the company. If they know these things and then they negotiate against it, you've got to replace the salespeople. It's just pretty simple. But if you don't have that, if you don't have the budgeting and the forecasting, if they don't know what their requirements are, or if they don't know what the revenue is, or if they don't know what the profit is required, then it's communications issue. It's the management coaching, it's the CEOs and the CFO's failure. So,
In our case, we do 4,000 jobs a year. I can't have my CFO involved in every single negotiation. So we set parameters. Here's a minimum level of gross margin that we will allow. If you want to go below that, because you think there's a relationship involved here, or a territorial issue you want to protect, you go through the channels. And eventually it'll get to me, depending on the size of the job. So we keep them, within the hash marks by doing that, so.
Well, with something similar where if you're only focusing on finance managing, in our case, finance managers and contracts, but if you focus on engaging with that deal at the contract point, you've lost control of the deal and actually lost control of a lot of the terms that are going to go into the contract. So we actually, finance managers are quote template. And to that end, there's structure around that we give to the field where they can manage certain pricing. And if they want to go outside of that, then they have to come to an executive team or finance to get approval to get past that. And if you start to control it there, and that's, pricing is only one set of terms that come through on that in terms of, what that deal may consist of. And a lot of the terms of the contract are going to be set forth as you start the quoting process and working through it. And if you get to control that aspect of it and a standard set of terms that go into that, that'll bring into the contract, and I think you'll have less problems at the end. But in our case, they manage both ends of that. So there's all control.
If you leave with anything today, leave with this: base your commissions to the salespeople on profitability, not sales. It really depends on the industry too. I mean, when you're a small company trying to grow, all we wanted was sales. We wanted to get customers in the door. We took some big hits. As we grew, as we became profitable, because our labor was lean, we were fine. But then we started adding middle management, we started adding additional IT resources, technology resources. Profitability started to decline, so we had to change the parameters, as you mentioned, to say this is based on gross profit. You're going to be compensated on gross profit. We had an overall change in the sales force from that standpoint.
Well, and that's where actually, you want controversy, that's where I would disagree with you. But it is some industry specific, so like in software, it's ethereal, right? I can take, in the old days, you took a CD or you can take a download, you read it one time, I can download it 1,000,000 times and charge $10, and it's, one cost of manufacturing process. So then you are just really in customer acquisition, and in our case, large capital software. We get the initial deal, and I have customers, a lot of customers that's been with us for over 20 years. I bought the company I work for. So we have customers that go back into the 80s, and once we got them, it's just an annuity check we get every month. So
Renewal, right.
I almost don't care about the front side of it. I'll pay a guy a commission to get a deal in, because if I can look at the long picture, I don't care about that initial engagement profitability. I want the long term. So in my case, it's quite a different scenario.
Fair, very, very true.
Any other burning question out there? I've got one for a little different. So if you're a CFO for the two CEOs, and I guess you guys have weighing on this too, if your CFO's got hit by a bus and you had to go find the next CFO, what would be some critical things you would want to consider when you have to do that?
I'll just go back to my original statement, which is vision, communication skills, and character. Character is the number one for me.
So that's where I get back to knowing the industry. So would you only look for guys in your industry, or would you be open to finding guys who a CFO says, I know how to be a good CFO, I can make it work for your industry?
I would prefer to go outside the industry, even though it's very helpful in the short term to grab somebody with experience. I think bringing that other perspective in helps. You never know.
I don't think
Looking at things much differently.
in industry, in my opinion, doesn't matter. In our cases, we've had nobody come from healthcare or software, and it's worked out quite well. There's a saying, hire for character, train for skill. Skill can be done through training. And that's really true. I mean, it's all about the character. So I'd actually, if I was evaluating you, I'd be looking at where you had worked, and then going back to those organizations. And actually, if you quit a job, not that the company might characterize it this way, but if you said, I had to leave that organization because I felt that they were ethically challenged in some of their actions, that would be actually much more attractive to me in wanting to have you come into my organization and bring that character into the organization. That's really critical. That's what you are. You bring that character of trust and stability and honesty into the organization, and ensure that's instilled throughout the whole organization.
Any thoughts from either Tom or Sal?
I'm actually a little surprised that that would be but as I'm thinking of it, that may not be a bad tack to take. Essentially, if you have a diversified history, employment history, I think that could bring some benefit to your companies. In the few times that I've actually looked for additional jobs or other jobs, I've always gone to my industry because I felt that I could immediately make some impact into the companies.
Sometimes I think that's a requirement of an enlightened CEO to realize that there might be some value from going outside your industry to get some insights. Don River was a military guy, as an example. I know in my other experiences with some of the guys bringing the outside, we brought bankers into other situations because they knew nothing about healthcare, but they were bankers, and it brought some whole different perspective. So I think it's maybe you got to find an enlightened CEO. Is there any other questions you guys have has this been helpful, I guess? Raise your hands. Has this been of interest? Has it been good? Is there any burning question that you've been afraid to ask that you want to ask? Yes, sir. Oh, Jerry, go ahead.
All right. So we talked about the importance of communication and being on the same in a sense, wavelength, CEO and CFO, but how far down do you push that into your organization? I mean, how far down do you get the message, the mission, so that the controller, maybe people in his or her department, and other departments as well, are in lockstep with you going forward and trying to achieve what you want to achieve?
Yeah, I would push it all the way down to the forklift driver. Because that's where everything starts. If they believe, if they understand, if they know, it's hard, I understand, but if they believe and they know, they'll drive safer, they'll drive more, they'll do whatever it is that they do in order to get the biggest bang for your buck. Because ultimately, it's not the idea of a CEO driving. It's the entire company, the entire bus going in the same direction, doing the same things. Because if it isn't, it ain't going anywhere.
And all those people, they're the ones engaging your customer at some different level, right? It might be your sales team, it might be your customer service. It could be anybody that's engaging a customer. And if you haven't instilled a common culture set, value set, and driven that down from the top all the way through the organization, you're going to start to get feedback of, oh, when this guy comes, I like him, and when this guy comes, I don't like him, and that you should never hear that. Then you have a problem either with those individuals that you have to evaluate as to why they don't behave the same, or they're not the right person for your organization. So that you have to have, we all should have the same behavior and the same ethics and the same standards that we engage our customers with. And if you're not going to get consistency.
I agree with what you said about, in our organization, there has to be communication down to the apprentice out in the field. I don't want them thinking of my CFO as just a guy that says, no, he's this, I won't use the term they use, but they need to understand why he's there, and he's guarding a bag of money. And if you need a tool, we should have budgeted for those tools in the first place. We've got a business to run here. So I think communicating to all levels of the organization the role of the CFO and why he's there is very important to everybody.
I think there's a philosophy, an approach that I would encourage some of my members to explore and consider. It's called, have you guys heard of the great game of business? It's all based on open book management. I think that Jerry addresses some of what you're talking about because it encourages companies to actually open and talk about the different financial aspects of the business to the employees. And literally, if you ever go to a company, Tasty Catering is one here in Chicago. They are open to having guests. They have weekly meetings where the financial line items, the P&L statements are on the board on a monthly basis, weekly basis, and the line items are being managed by other members of the team. It's not the CFO's responsibility to come and say, this is the numbers, this is what's going on. It's actually other people that are helping to generate that, and it's also forward-looking. And that, I think, gets to your point, is that people are learning the appreciation that their actions have an implication on the financial impact, has a financial impact on the success of the company. And I really encourage that a lot.
Yeah, I got a client right now in Wisconsin that is a very seasonal business, so they have a lot of temps working the line. And in the busy season, they have 120 temps. In a slower season, they have 25, 30 temps. The temps know what the CEO needs done. So they know that every item that they pick up has to be handled a certain way, has to be processed a certain way, it has to be checked in a certain way, it has to be checked out a certain way. And that's temps. I'm not even talking about the full-time employees. I'm not talking about them. They know it cold. So that, and the organization, they're driving 40% gross profit and almost 19% net income. So that, and big dollars. So they know exactly what's going on. And that's how you can get really good company working really well.
Becomes a double-edged sword sometime, though, because if you're reporting net income to the masses, when they're not meeting their goals, or when the company's not meeting the goals, I don't mean to say when they're not meeting their goals, but as a company you're not meeting your goals, it becomes a difficult conversation and there may be repercussions from that. And we've gone through that over the last couple of years.
I would just make a comment on all that. People to know, our firm does a lot of work in ownership transition and employee engagement and all. And, you know, and we do a lot of stuff with Great Games of Business. But Great Games of Business isn't always necessarily thrown. Everybody in this room wants to see the P&L, right? P&L to a line worker means nothing and just gets them confused. So the real key is, what are the key performance indicators that they can see and they can impact, and they go, if I do this. And still have an open book transparency to them, but them looking into net income, they'll probably pound. There may be a very good reason why, for tax return, we show a very small net income, but they may be in a panic to say, oh my God, we only made 2% this year.
Yeah,
You know,
well-
but if you're showing them the key performance indicators that they can impact, it gets them engaged.
Hi, I'm Caroline Coleman. I have a question for you. One thing I haven't heard brought up, the interaction between CEO and CFO that are millennials and Gen X. Could you share a little bit of your insights?
Have they made it that far up the chain already?
The millennials think they're gonna be CEO a year in.
Well, they think they are.
They're amazing.
I got a client that right now, same client that I was telling you, the CEO is 30 and I'm 54. My son is older than he is. So it's not easy. Because I'm still looking at, I'm working on a Dell computer and, spreadsheets and everything else, and he's looking at Apple and it's old in the cloud and whatever it is, and we're talking two different languages. I'm talking about being grounded and he's talking about, buying a plane. So it's completely opposite ends, but that's what makes it a go.
I think that's a great question. I heard a statistic that there's 10,000 baby boomers retiring every day for the next 10 years. Who's going to backfill them? Gen X, but mostly these millennials. We just recently, we're moving our offices, and in the old days, I remember when my dad's company moved, he just moved wherever the company was. Now we have to negotiate with these millennials because they don't have cars, they live in the city, we're moving our offices to the suburb. That is a huge issue for those folks that are going to be around the next 10 or 20 years, dealing with the different mindset of the millennials.
I have no experience other than the fact that I think my CEO acts like a millennial. So he wants everything now and he doesn't care what it costs. So I think that's where the committees come in and they sort of tamper him down.
Well, I think one example of that is a company, and that company is holistically that style. That's a different type of corporate engagement. We get to deal with a lot of like Deloitte and Touches and those types of organizations, and they hire these kids by the thousands, and they work them literally 80 hours a week. One of our good friends of ours, Epic, up in Wisconsin, I mean, Madison Airport, if you work for Epic, they have about 12,000 employees. You have to live in Madison, and they fly you literally all over the United States every week. And these kids love it until they don't anymore. Then they get burnt out, and then their attitude starts to change around some of those things. So I think there is some corporate differences between how you see that. There's organizations that are in Chicago, and they're that all 30-something, employees, and then there's other types of engagement where the corporate structure actually kind of breaks the kids in a lot of ways, and then we have to deal with the after effect of that.
I see we're getting close to the 9 o'clock witching hour, so I want to thank the panelists, all you guys, for joining me on this. I hope that we've answered some questions, given you some new ideas that you found as beneficial. I appreciate having the time to spend with you, and happy trails on your ventures, whatever those might be. Thank you.